Hey guys, it's Seanie B. Let's talk about Season 4, Episode 7. It was called Yeon, and we find out later that's the name of Jin and Sun's baby. And I really like this episode, especially towards the end, because in the end there's a big twist. We find out that it's actually Jin's flashback while it's Sun's flash forward. And the writers give us a lot of clues before the end to let us know that that's the case too, and I'll show you them during this recap. So again, this episode had Sun in her flash forwards while it had Jin in his flashbacks. The flashback and flash forward were played against each other in like a neat manner to make you think that they're both occurring within the same time frame. I will see later in this episode that Jin's trying really hard to buy a stuffed panda bear, which is kind of ironic because pandas are notoriously known for being bad at reproducing, just like how Jin and Sun were unable to have children for so long. Now, a lot of people are wondering what the importance is of Jin's flashback. We know Sun's is giving birth, obviously, but Jin's was just to trick us in the end. I think it was important because it showed us who Jin was before the island and how the island changed him. It went from Jin controlling Sun to listening to her, forgiving her, and ultimately having the right relationship with her. It starts off with Frank, and he's on the freighter at night, and he's going to bring some food to Dez and Saeed. He sees Regina in the hallways, and this is the first time we see her. If you remember, she's the one that answers the calls all season long from Dan, Miles, C.S. Lewis, and Frank when they're on the island. And it turns out that she's reading a book upside down. The book Regina is supposedly reading is called The Survivors of the Chancellor. It's an 1875 novel about the final voyage of a British sailing vessel called the Chancellor. And at the very beginning of the voyage, the Chancellor carried 8 passengers and 20 crew members, but by the end, only 11 people, which are 5 passengers and 6 crew members, remained alive. So once again, it's very fitting in the story of how people are dying on the freighter. And also in the middle of the book, there's a mutiny, and the leader of the mutiny is killed with an axe to the chest. Now remember this because I'm going to be bringing it up later in this recap. Now I have a few ideas as to what this could mean, reading the book upside down, that is. Either it means she has a sickness and is trying to hide the fact because she knows she'll be shoved into sick bay and eventually die from it. Or maybe she is just covering up whatever she's trying to do by having the book there, or maybe we're supposed to find whatever clues we can from this book and flip them around somehow. Frank goes into the sick bay and dumps a bunch of lima bean cans onto the bed, saying that's all they had and that they had a little problem in the kitchen. Saeed says, "I want to talk to the captain," and Frank says, "Oh, no you don't." He goes to Jin and Sun on the beach, and Jin says he wants to have a baby girl and wants to name her Yeon, which is the name of this episode. We flash forward to Sun, who's very pregnant and starts to feel contractions. They pan out and we see her big tummy. Obviously this is a flash forward because she looks as if she's about to give birth, and she hasn't had any previous children. Now a funny and weird thing, notice that the TV she turns off. It shows only on the screen for a split second, but we can see that it's clearly Nikki from Expose. We know she was an actress. I just hope it isn't live, or else the writers have a lot of explaining to do. Next we go to Jin, and he's off the island and he's in Korea. And it's our first clue that Jin's story in this episode is a flashback because he genuinely looks younger. The makeup artists obviously were trying to make him look younger. Jin runs into a toy store and he's frantically looking around for a stuffed panda bear, and he asks the store clerk where one is. Now notice behind the clerk there's only a stuffed dragon and not a stuffed panda bear. Now remember this, keep this in mind because I'm going to be talking about it in just a little bit. Now another early clue as to this being Jin's flashback is his cell phone. This is the type of phone that was used back in like 2000. No businessman would use this type of phone in 2007. Kate comes back and tells Jin and Sun about their little adventure last episode and how Juliet lied to Jack about the Tempest being an electrical station when it was really a poison gas factory. And it got me wondering, why would Juliet lie about that? Is she still working for Ben, even though she says she isn't? Also, remember at the end of last episode, we never heard the conversation between C.S. Lewis and Kate when she supposedly said she'd tell Kate everything she wants to know about why they're there. Kate says that they're doing that just to get brownie points, so obviously it was something C.S. Lewis said to her. Back to the freighter, Saeed's eating the lima beans. Now we probably know why the people on the freighter brought the hazmat suits in the first place. It was probably necessary on a ship with nothing but beans. And even though there was an incident in the kitchen, why on earth would you have that many cans of lima beans in the first place? I'm still wondering why Saeed didn't catch it, as he catches pretty much everything, but Desmond notices that a note is pushed under the door and it says, "Don't trust the captain." Sun meets Dan for the first time and asks if they're here to rescue everyone. Dan evades the question, so Sun knows that that's not why they're here. An interesting thing to note here is how Dan doesn't want to tell Sun who's calling the shots, yet big players like Ben, last episode, freely tells Locke that Widmore's calling all the shots, and later in this episode we find out the captain tells Desmond and Saeed freely that it's Widmore, yet Dan feels like he can't tell Sun for some reason. It flashes forward to Sun, and she's being wheeled into the hospital, and one of the nurses mentions that she's one of the Oceanic Six. So far, Hurley, Saeed, Jack, Kate, and now Sun have all been referred to as the Oceanic Six. So for sure, there are 5 of the 6. And at the very end of this recap, we'll talk about who the 6 are. Sun's about to go into labor as the doctor comes in. She asks if anything is wrong, and he has a worried look on his face and says that the baby is in distress. Now, earlier when Sun calls the hospital, she says that she thinks something's wrong. I'm not sure what both these comments are referring to, as they never talked about it the rest of the episode. The doctor asks if there's anyone they should contact, like her husband, and Sun says, "Yeah, get Jin my husband," and she starts to drift away. Now, this is important to remember because I'll just tell you right now, and I'll talk about the end of the recap, but supposedly Jin dies, and so who would they be referring to when they say husband? It could be that Sun's just under a bunch of drugs and is not thinking straight. It goes to Jin and his flashback, and it seems like the hospital's calling him to tell him to hurry up. The guy in this flashback acted like the old Jin, the Jin who was terrified of his boss, his father-in-law, and obsessed with his work. The new Jin wouldn't be fiddling over some panda bear. If his wife was in labor giving birth, he'd be with her. His phone is bumped out of his hands as he puts the panda bear in the cab, and it's run over. Then some random guy gets in the cab instead and drives off. Now why on earth would the guy jumping in the cab not notice a life-size panda bear in there? Our panda bear is just so part of Korea's culture that no one seems to notice them anymore. It's funny when he curses the guy too. He acts just like the old Jin of the past.